The Cold War spreads. In this lesson, you will describe how the Cold War affected countries, governments, and international affairs in the mid-20th century. Hello, dearies. My name's Annie Parkins, but my friends call me Atomic Annie. That's because my folks had a restaurant in California called the Atomic Diner. The time I grew up in, way back in the 1950s, was called the Atomic Age. Early on, people were optimistic that nuclear power was the wave of the future, with great promise for advances in power generation, medicine, and food safety. Optimism soon turned to fear, though. The terror of atomic weapons spread throughout the world like wildfire. I'd overhear terrified customers talking about how they were living in the atomic age, and believe me, that wasn't a good thing anymore. I must say, however, that the fear turned into a strange fascination with these weapons of destruction. People were talking about them in the news, popular songs, comics, commercials. If memory serves me well, there was also at least one movie made on the subject. The fear of a nuclear war took people almost to the brink of insanity. They tried finding ways to protect themselves from bombings. I remember how some of my neighbors built shelters in their backyards to shield themselves from an atomic explosion. People even taught their children what to do in the event of a bombing. That time is past now, though we still have much to learn from it.
Atomic bombs are a type of nuclear weapon. List three reasons people might be fascinated by something as dangerous as a nuclear weapon. They might be curious about the materials used to create nuclear weapons. They might wonder how nuclear weapons hold the potential to wipe out an entire city. And they might be fascinated by the devastating effects of nuclear weapons.
Timeline. Major events of the Cold War. Click each event on the timeline to learn more about the major events that took place during the Cold War. Use the controls on the left to expand and contract the timeline or to return to the beginning. The Soviets detonate an atomic bomb. On August 29, 1949, the Soviet Union tested its first atomic bomb in Kazakhstan. Called First Lightning, the bomb exploded amid buildings constructed to test its impact. 1950. The Korean War begins. With the goal of spreading communism, North Korea declared war on South Korea on June 25, 1950. Approximately 75,000 North Korean soldiers marched toward Seoul, South Korea's capital. 1954. France is defeated at Dien Bien Phu. Vietnam was under France's rule as a French colony. Communists in Vietnam wanted to take control of their country. A communist organization called the Viet Minh attacked French soldiers in the city of Dien Bien Phu. They forced the French out of Vietnam. 1959. The Cuban Revolution ends. In Cuba, a communist named Fidel Castro led a revolution to overthrow the Cuban president, Fulgencio Batista. Castro's army achieved its goal in 1959. Castro's communist government came into power, replacing Batista's authoritarian government. Navigate to previous slide. Timeline. Major events of the Cold War. Navigate. The arms race. In
The arms race.
1946, the former British Prime Minister
1940
Winston Churchill gave a speech that helped to set off the Cold War. He spoke of the Iron Curtain and expressed his wish to side with the United States against the communist Soviet Union. Churchill assumed that the United States alone had the knowledge to create atomic devices. However, Churchill was unaware of a new development. Soviet spies had secretly gained information about the U.S. atomic bomb project, called the Manhattan Project. As a result, the Soviets had learned how to make atomic bombs. They detonated one in 1949, marking the start of a deadly nuclear arms race.
Winston Churchill on the left and President Harry Truman on the right traveled to Fulton, Missouri, where Churchill delivered his famous Sinews of Peace speech, in which he refers to the Iron Curtain.
During World War II, the Manhattan Project had created just 3 atomic bombs. The U.S. military dropped 2 of them on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. After the war, the production of atomic weapons continued. When the Soviet Union began building atomic bombs in 1949, the United States felt threatened. To protect itself, it decided to create a weapon far more powerful. In 1952, the United States successfully detonated the first thermonuclear, or hydrogen, bomb. The Soviet Union tested a similar bomb the following year. This ongoing competition between the United States and the Soviet Union led to the production of many more nuclear weapons. In the years to come, the rivals developed nuclear testing programs. Both sides created smaller but devastating nuclear weapons. Testing of such devices made the news all over the world. As a result, fear and anxiety increased. Many people believed that a deadly nuclear war was unavoidable. Watch the video on the next screen to see a nuclear test conducted in Nevada.
H minus 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Toward the end of World War II, the Germans had used rocket propulsion to drop bombs on London. As weapons became more sophisticated, so did their delivery systems. Both the United States and the Soviet Union built powerful airplanes to transport and drop nuclear bombs. These planes had jet engines, which made them lighter and faster. After the war, the United States and the Soviet Union also started manufacturing rockets containing nuclear bombs. Today, these weapons are known as guided missiles. This technology allowed the rivals to deliver nuclear bombs to targets with great precision, and it could be done with the simple push of a button. Gradually, missiles were favored over jets. By the 1960s, both sides had enough nuclear weapons to wipe out each other multiple times. As the arms race intensified, both sides tried to use outer space to their advantage, leading to a space race. In 1957, the Soviet Union stunned the United States by launching the first human-made satellite, Sputnik 1. Technical experts were surprised to see the Soviets achieve this feat before the United States. At the end of 1957, the first U.S. satellite, Vanguard, exploded on the launch pad. The failure seemed to show the Soviets' superiority in the space race. The United States was determined to prove itself. It successfully launched another satellite, Explorer, in 1958. Although it was smaller than Sputnik, Explorer went deeper into space. While the United States was proud of its entry into the space race, the Soviets responded with another launch soon after.
We're talking about satellites. And if you look here, the Sputnik was only 23 inches across. This caption is what helps us understand what the image is talking about. So we might think, oh, if it went into space, it was this huge thing, but it's less than 2 feet across.
President Eisenhower reassures the nation that Russia's success with the first satellite does not indicate a serious lag in American rocket research.
Vanguard, for the reasons indicated, has not had equal priority with that accorded our ballistic missile work. Speed of progress in the satellite project cannot be taken as an index of our progress in ballistic missile work. Our satellite program has never been conducted as a race with other nations. Rather, it has been carefully scheduled as part of the scientific work of the International Geophysical Year. I consider our country's satellite program to be well designed and properly scheduled to achieve the scientific purposes for which it was initiated. We are, therefore, carrying the program forward in keeping with our arrangements with the international scientific community.
In the video, how did Dwight Eisenhower explain why the Vanguard wasn't successful before the Soviets launched Sputnik? He explained that the Vanguard wasn't supposed to compete with the Soviet Union Sputnik. He tried to make citizens understand that the two sides were not involved in the much talked about space war. Eisenhower stressed that Vanguard stood for cooperation between scientists and was on schedule.
Atomic diplomacy. During the arms race, the United States and the Soviet Union were aware of each other's strengths. This knowledge led to some difficult situations. In 1956, the U.S. Secretary of State, John Dulles, announced the policy of brinkmanship. The idea behind brinkmanship was that leaders on both sides of a confrontation would go to the brink of nuclear war rather than back down. Brinkmanship led to the threat of mutually assured destruction. The United States and the Soviet Union knew they would both be destroyed in a nuclear war. As a result, populations on both sides feared the end of the world due to nuclear war.
Mutually assured destruction. During the Cold War, the idea that no one will start an all-out nuclear war because no side can win and no side can survive.
The United States and the Soviet Union avoided a nuclear war despite their ill will toward each other. Although they didn't indulge in armed conflict or shooting wars, they didn't stay quiet either. The rivals provided military assistance to their allies, who were fighting one another. These regional conflicts were known as proxy wars. Through such wars, both sides opposed each other without directly engaging in war.
Proxy war, a war instigated by a major power but fought by another smaller nation.
Match each Cold War term with its definition. So, brinkmanship, leaders were willing to threaten nuclear war rather than back down in a confrontation, but both sides knew that they would be wiped out in a nuclear war, which is called mutually assured destruction.
The Cold War in Asia. Early on, the world assumed that the Cold War was a struggle between only the United States and the Soviet Union. However, two events in 1949 changed this perception. First, However, two events in 1949 changed this perception. First, the Chinese leader Mao Zedong established a communist government in China. He renamed the country the People's Republic of China. Second, Mao Zedong formed an alliance with the leaders of the Soviet Union. This development turned the Cold War into a global struggle. The main focus of this struggle was the spread of communism and its containment. China and the Soviet Union supported extending communism to other countries. The United States and its allies wanted to prevent that from happening.
Mao Zedong is considered the founding father of the People's Republic of China. There's a statue.
The Korean War. During the Cold War, Korea became another source of tension. This Asian peninsula had been divided into North and South Korea at the end of World War II. The Soviet Union took control of North Korea and turned it into a communist country. The United States sponsored the anti-communist South Korea, or the Republic of Korea. In North Korea, the Soviets put their support behind a loyal communist leader named Kim Il-sung. He ruled North Korea as a dictator. In South Korea, the United States backed anti-communist leader Syngman Rhee. Both leaders claimed sovereignty over all of Korea. Despite a few conflicts on the border, a war was unexpected. The events that followed marked the beginning of the first military action in the Cold War. In June 1950, the North Korean army invaded South Korea. The invading army was well trained and equipped with Soviet weapons. Rhee's forces in the south were no match. The United States called on the Security Council of the United Nations, UN, to take action against North Korea. The nations making up the Security Council voted in agreement to send troops to support South Korea. There was no objection from the Soviet Union because it was boycotting the UN at the time. While 15 nations provided support for South Korea, the United States contributed the most troops to the effort. U.S. General Douglas MacArthur led the UN forces. Under MacArthur's leadership, the troops forced the North Koreans to retreat. MacArthur pushed his troops into North Korea until they came close to the country's northern border with China. China saw this move as a threat to its own security. Late in 1950, it sent forces into North Korea to push back MacArthur's forces. General MacArthur, angered over Chinese involvement in North Korea, wanted the United States to bomb China. U.S. President Harry Truman disagreed. He was concerned that bombing China would lead to war with China's ally, the Soviet Union, and potentially to the use of nuclear weapons. Because Truman disagreed with MacArthur's foreign policy, he fired the popular general. The Korean War continued without either side gaining a clear advantage. In 1953, both sides signed a ceasefire. They agreed to stop fighting, and the boundary between North Korea and South Korea was reestablished. The United States also signed a treaty with South Korea, promising to protect it from its northern neighbor in the future.
Why didn't the Korean War turn into a nuclear war? Because President Truman refused to bomb China because he believed it could lead to a war with the Soviet Union.
Southeast Asia. While the Cold War in North Korea subsided, it spread to Southeast Asia. These tensions were the result of the region's difficult history. At the beginning of 1887, France established a colony known as French Indochina in Southeast Asia. Eventually, the colony included Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. During World War II, the Japanese took control of French Indochina. After the war, the French tried to re-establish their colonial rule in the region. A communist leader in Vietnam named Ho Chi Minh led a rebel group, the Viet Minh. He and his Viet Minh forces opposed the French. By 1953, the French had taken over the city of Dien Bien Phu in northwest Vietnam. In March 1954, Ho Chi Minh ordered the Viet Minh army to attack Dien Bien Phu. Led by General Vo Nguyen Giap, the attack lasted 57 days. By the end, the Viet Minh had defeated the French. As a result, France was forced out of the region. After France's defeat in 1954, Vietnam split into North and South Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh took control of North Vietnam under a communist government. The United States put Ngo Dinh Diem in charge of South Vietnam. The United States feared a communist revolution in South Vietnam. U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower wanted Diem's government to stay strong. Eisenhower was afraid that if Ho Chi Minh took over South Vietnam, other Southeast Asian nations would fall to communism. Eisenhower compared this spread of communism to dominoes toppling each other. Eisenhower's concept came to be known as the domino theory. It was used to justify U.S. involvement in a number of international disputes, including the conflict in Vietnam. In 1954, the United States and its allies wanted to form an organization to oppose communism. In September, the United States, France, Great Britain, New Zealand, Australia, the Philippines, Thailand, and Pakistan established the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, SEATO, SEATO. The primary goal of SEATO was to stop the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. Vietnam was included as a territory under SEATO protection. For that reason, the United States claimed a right to continue its involvement there. With the support of China and the Soviet Union, Ho Chi Minh continued to pursue his goal of reunifying Vietnam under a communist government. North Vietnam began to encourage and aid communist rebels in South Vietnam, called the Viet Cong, to overthrow Diem's government. To stop them, the United States continued to provide financial and military aid to South Vietnam. In the United States, John F. Kennedy was elected president in 1960. By this time, North Vietnam was sending large quantities of weapons and supplies to the Viet Cong. Kennedy increased U.S. involvement in the war by sending supplies and U.S. military advisors to South Vietnam. He also sent 9,000 U.S. troops. However, he was not in favor of sending a large number of armed forces into the region. In November 1963, both Diem and Kennedy were assassinated in two unrelated events. These tragedies worsened the political instability in Vietnam. Vice President Lyndon Johnson succeeded Kennedy in the White House. As president, Johnson strongly believed in the domino theory. He sent more advisors and troops to South Vietnam. The war in Vietnam intensified in August of 1964. 3 Vietnamese torpedo boats attacked 2 U.S. naval ships in the Gulf of Tonkin in North Vietnam. President Johnson requested that Congress give him the authority to involve the U.S. military in the war. Congress agreed by passing the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. It gave Johnson the power to escalate the war. In 1965, U.S. aircraft began bombing North Vietnam. Johnson also increased the number of U.S. troops to 500,000. Meanwhile, China and the Soviet Union provided military aid to North Vietnam. As U.S. involvement in the war increased, so did the war's unpopularity among Americans. a large anti-war movement took shape to protest the civilian and military casualties. Despite American protests, the war didn't appear to be ending anytime soon.
I believe this part right here appears on the guided notes just out of order, maybe like after something that's 3 slides to the right. I don't know for sure. Just be a heads up, that's a weird one.
In 1968, the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces, led by General Giap, launched the Tet Offensive. The series of surprise attacks in South Vietnam took place during the Vietnamese New Year festival called Tet. Although U.S. forces mounted a strong response, the North Vietnamese made it clear they weren't giving up. The North Vietnamese seemed stronger than ever. Johnson realized that a victory in Vietnam was impossible, and U.S. citizens lost faith in him. Instead of running for re-election the next year, Johnson vowed not to run again and to seek peace. He encouraged peace talks between North Vietnam and the United States to end the war. But Richard Nixon, who became president in 1969, refused to withdraw U.S. troops from South Vietnam. The U.S. government, under pressure from the anti-war movement, finally pulled out of the war in 1973. The last ground forces left in March of that year, and the United States soon moved to reduce aid to South Vietnam. North and South Vietnam continued to battle for complete control of the country. Finally, on April 30th, 1975, North Vietnamese forces entered Saigon, South Vietnam's capital. The last U.S. personnel in Vietnam were airlifted out of the city as it fell. South Vietnam surrendered that day, and the war came to an end. Vietnam was soon unified under a single communist government. The Vietnam War left its mark on history in many ways. In particular, the use of proxy wars to contain communism has been highly criticized and discredited. The Cold War in Latin America. Since the time of the Monroe Doctrine, the United States has been involved in European policies directed toward Latin American countries. After World War II, the United States put a new focus on the Monroe Doctrine as the government responded to the presence of socialism and communism in Latin America. To oppose communism, the United States and other countries of the Americas met for a conference in Bogota, Colombia, in 1948. Together, they took a pledge to combat communism in the Western Hemisphere. The conference led to the formation of the Organization of American States, OAS. It included 21 nations. According to its charter, the primary goals of the OAS members were to ensure an order of peace and justice, to promote their solidarity, to strengthen their collaboration, and to defend their sovereignty, their territorial integrity, and their independence. The OAS nations pledged to resolve disputes that arose among the member nations and prevent threats from outside the Western Hemisphere.
Despite the support of the OAS, the United States faced communist challenges in Central and South America. The U.S. government took a series of actions against each of them. In 1950, the citizens of Guatemala elected Jacobo Arbenz as president. Arbenz was a socialist. Many people in the United States believed that socialist policies could lead to the development of a communist state. Therefore, the United States viewed Arbenz and his reforms as a communist threat. In the years that followed, the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, helped to form an anti-Arbenz army. This army invaded Guatemala in 1954. On June 27, 1954, Arbenz was forced to resign and flee the country.
In 1970, socialist leader Salvador Allende became the president of Chile. He advocated economic reforms, including higher wages. He also brought many industries under government control. Allende's decisions did not sit well with the United States. General Augusto Pinochet, the leader of the Chilean army, also disliked Allende's leadership. In 1973, he led a rebellion against the president. Seeing an opening, the CIA offered support to Pinochet, and his army overthrew Allende. In 1979, the United States took additional action against communism. For 46 years, Anastasio Somoza, a dictator, had ruled the Republic of Nicaragua in Central America. During the 1970s, a rebel group named the Sandinistas, or the Sandinista National Liberation Front, FSLN, emerged. It overthrew Somoza and gained control of Nicaragua in 1979. The United States viewed the Sandinistas as a threat because they supported communist policies and had close ties with communist nations. Another Nicaraguan group, the Contras, began fighting against the Sandinistas. The United States provided financial and military aid to the Contras for many years.
Why did the United States oppose the government of President Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala? Because he was a socialist.
Castro's Cuba. The most notorious influence of the Cold War in the Western Hemisphere was found in Cuba, a country 90 miles from the southern tip of Florida. From 1952 to 1959, a corrupt anti-communist dictator named Fulgencio Batista ruled Cuba. Batista opposed communism by declaring that Cuba's Communist Party was illegal. He enjoyed full support from the United States because of his anti-communist attitude. The United States also controlled much of the Cuban economy during Batista's rule. However, by 1955, Batista's corrupt government had damaged Cuba's economy. Student riots and other protests against Batista became common. In 1956, Fidel Castro launched a communist revolution to overthrow Batista. Many Cubans supported Castro against Batista's oppressive government. The United States reduced its support for Batista, although it didn't turn against him. In 1959, Castro's guerrilla warfare tactics forced Batista to flee Cuba. After Batista went into exile, Castro became the Prime Minister of Cuba. Many Cubans migrated to Florida. Some of them did so because they were loyal supporters of Batista. Others doubted Castro's leadership and feared for their freedom. Castro's communist government brought Cuban industries under its control, even though some of them were owned by U.S. corporations. Castro also allied himself with communist countries, including the Soviet Union. In turn, the Soviets provided financial and military aid to Cuba. As a result of Castro's actions, the United States discontinued all diplomatic and trade relations with Cuba in 1961.
I believe that was called the Cuban trade embargo. Basically, nobody could do any sort of trade. Couldn't go visit there, couldn't trade with them, nothing like that.
The loss of control over Cuban industries and the rise of communism in Cuba was a severe blow to the United States' anti-communist efforts. In response, the CIA provided military training to 1,400 Cubans who had fled Cuba. President Eisenhower had authorized the training and a planned invasion of Cuba. Before the invasion could happen, his term as president ended and John F. Kennedy came to power. President Kennedy went forward with the invasion despite some concerns about the plan. In April 1961, the CIA's trained army invaded the southern coast of Cuba. This military operation came to be known as the Bay of Pigs invasion. However, the CIA had underestimated Castro's troops. Within 24 hours, the CIA's army surrendered, bringing the invasion to an abrupt end. The Bay of Pigs invasion is considered one of the biggest military failures in U.S. history. The Cold War between the United States and Cuba intensified in 1962. On October 15th, a U.S. reconnaissance plane spotted missiles being installed in Cuba. This event, which led to 2 weeks of panic among Americans and Soviets alike, was called the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Soviet Union was using Cuba as a nuclear missile base. The missiles were capable of dropping atomic bombs on the United States and causing severe devastation. President Kennedy wanted this secret operation to end. Meanwhile, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev denied that the missiles even existed. Kennedy and his advisors weighed their options. Some called for the United States to bomb the missile sites or to launch an invasion of Cuba. But since the missiles weren't fully built, Kennedy ordered the U.S. Navy to form a blockade, or barrier, around Cuba by sea. That way, Soviet ships wouldn't be able to transport the supplies needed for Cuba to complete installation of the missiles.
Notice on this map how close Cuba is to Florida. And the range of these missiles is within this area. So you're talking about the proximity of wiping out 3/4 or more of the United States, including Mexico and a good, chunk of Canada. So that's not a good thing.
For 2 weeks, the United States negotiated with the Soviets while the world feared a nuclear war. On October 26th, Khrushchev offered to remove the missiles from Cuba. However, he demanded that Kennedy promise to keep U.S. troops from invading Cuba. A day later, Khrushchev made another offer. He promised to dismantle the Soviet missiles if the United States removed missiles it installed in Turkey. After some deliberation, Kennedy agreed to Khrushchev's terms. The Cuban Missile Crisis came to a close on October 28, 1962. After these events, the rivals became wary of the use of nuclear weapons. Their concern led to the Limited Test Ban Treaty. In 1963, the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union signed the treaty. It limited the testing of nuclear weapons and was a step toward easing the threat of nuclear war. With the signing of the treaty, the Cold War started to lose its intensity.
So the communists identify what each side accomplished during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So the communists were able to negotiate that there would be no invasion of Cuba. The United States accomplished getting the missiles removed from Cuba, and both sides avoided a nuclear war. Again, this is a Venn diagram. The area they overlap is both. What they have similar, what is different.
Whew! That was a close one. See what I mean, dearies? The threat of nuclear weapons had everyone afraid, especially during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when we went to the brink of war. But you can't live like that, now can you? So you do little things to make life less scary, like name your diner the Atomic Diner and decorate it with images of bomb blasts. We can certainly be thankful that cool heads and negotiations diffuse some tense situations.
Congratulations, you've completed the tutorial, The Cold War Spreads. Now remember, as you're doing your guided notes, the glossary terms are found within the glossary here. So let's look. The first term is Iron Curtain. So I would do a Control I Control F, and then do iron. There you go, Iron Curtain. Control copy. Iron Curtain is a term coined by Winston Churchill to describe the division of Europe into free and communist blocs. Brinkmanship. Brinkmanship is a policy of taking somebody right up to the brink of pushing a conflict to the limit of safety to force a desired result. Mutually assured destruction. Your mutually assured destruction is that we know that if we start this, nobody's going to win, nobody's going to survive. So there's really no way to have a nuclear war because once it starts, nobody survives. Proxy war, that's what I was at. So proxy. So a proxy war is a war that is instigated by a major power, but then fought by another smaller nation. In gang terms, you might see this as big homie, little homie. So the big dogs start the fight, but then they use all the small soldiers to fight the fight. Not a good deal. Don't be used, people. Domino theory. This is the idea that our allies and domino theory. There it was. I was typing it wrong. This is the idea that one nation falls to communism, then the nations around it will fall to communism. And that was discouraged. Okay, so make sure you put into the glossary the correct terms, the definitions. If you did not go to the glossary here, the other place you could find it is in the Google Classroom. It is found in Google Classroom by going to the class that you have. So in this case, it's World History. And going into Classwork, followed by the Class Drive folder. And you'll notice that the glossary for Plato course, California World History, is right here, along with the notes. So you do have access without going into Edmentum. If Edmentum was down or you just didn't like using it, there is a way around it. Make sure that you complete all of the blocks, mindful that I might have highlighted where there's a checkbox. Do your best to write these answers in. This section's a little confusing because of the arrows and what happened when. Mostly as you're looking through, look for the dates. Before, during, after, that type of a thing. This section says large anti-war movement protested civilian and military casualties. This was difficult because it appears that it comes right before the Cold War in Latin America, but it's actually like 3 slides before the slide that has this title. So just double check that. And then make sure you write your own summary. How did the Cold War rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union change as it spread to Asia and Latin America? I would think that it would intensify because of its proximity, and that was pretty scary and drastic. Make sure you type that in. Okay, that is the end of the Cold War spreads. Thank you.